The Mummy's Tomb was a 1942 black and white Universal monster film, and it was a direct sequel to the film The Mummy's Hand. And I think I misspoke on one of my earlier reviews. I apologize to my 3 fans. I think I said there were only 3 classic Universal Mummy films, when in fact, the more I researched this, there are actually 6, and that includes the Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy film. So forgive me. Look, this is something I'm still learning. So here we go. The breakdown is there's the original Boris Karloff mummy in 1932, The Mummy's Hand in 1940, The Mummy's Tomb in 1942, The Mummy's Curse 1944, The Mummy's Ghost 1944, and Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy from 1955. This poor mummy fellow just can't get a break. They're always reanimating him and bringing him back to life to go on some sort of terrible mission. Well, this one's not any different. So the plot is basically the film is now 30 years from the events of The Mummy's Hand. And the film opens up with the character Steve Banning. He's played again by Dick Foran. He was in The Mummy's Hand from 1940. So we're 30 years in the future. He's an old man. He's got the old man makeup on, and he's telling the story of the mummy events to his family and friends. And all the while, we're seeing flashbacks of footage from the Mummy's Hand movie. In fact, a good chunk of the beginning of the film is all about just Steve recapping the first film. So meanwhile, we jump over to Egypt and the character Andoheb. I remember him. He was in the last film played by George Zucco. He's the guy who I thought resembled Alan Arkin. So amazingly, he survived the last film in which he was shot multiple times in the chest and rolled down about 100 stairs. Nah, he's fine. But he's old now and he's dying, and he gives his dying instructions to his faithful follower, this guy named Mehmet. He's played by this actor Turhan Bey. And he gives him instructions about controlling our old buddy, the mummy Karis. Now, a note about the actor Turhan Bey. I've not seen him in anything that I can think of, and he was really cool as an actor. I read some of his background, and he's an actor of Turkish descent, and he has this very cool, suave mannerism to his acting. He really does a great job as the nemesis of this film, who is, secretly calling the shots behind the scene. Because, he's given these instructions from, George Zucco on how to use those tanna leaves to reanimate and control the mummy. Because that seems to be what we do in this film. We bring back the mummy and send him off on a killing spree. Now here the mummy is played by Lon Chaney Jr., and he is awesome. The makeup looks so good. And, having seen Lon Chaney now in a whole bunch of films, I could barely even tell this was him. He is just buried under this makeup, and he plays the mummy really well. Not only giving him, a really creepy appearance, but he also, the way he physically acts as the mummy is very cool and convincing. He's got the creepy, staggering limp, but he also does this thing where he kind of cradles his right arm throughout the film. It's almost like he's starting to decompose and he's losing, that animation of his body or something. It's really cool. So Andoheb gives the instructions on how to control Karis, and then he up and dies. And his final instructions are basically go off and kill Steve Banning and his descendants, because the film's got to be about revenge. So Andoheb dies, and Bey and Karis leave Egypt off on their mission. Mummy just wants to be left alone and sleep. Nope, they just keep digging this guy up and sending him off to kill people. So Bey gets to America and sets up shop at a local cemetery. And to be honest, that was actually a pretty clever idea. I mean, if you're going to be messing with mummies and reanimation and stuff, might as well do it at a funeral home where no one's going to be there. So Bey gets to work, starts brewing up some of that tasty Tana tea for Karis. And like I said, you kind of feel sorry for the mummy. He's always getting woken up and dragged out to go kill somebody. And, you can't help but think, if there's like this voice in Karis's head when he staggers off every time, like, what the heck was I thinking doing this mummy thing? Well, anyhow, he goes off and he kills the old Steve Banning. So That's sort of his first victim. Word starts to get out. The newspapers start reporting strange events and killings going on. And then soon, the character Babe Hansen, who was played by Wallace Ford, he was also in the old man makeup, and he was in the previous films. He's kind of the Lou Costello sort of lumpy sidekick. So he shows up, and he sees what's going on. He tells the locals and the sheriff that this looks like the work of the mummy. They're not buying it. And he doesn't last too long, actually, before the mummy finds him and kills him off, too. So we're soon introduced to Dr. John Banning, one of the descendants of Steve Banning. He's played by John Hubbard, who seeks out a professor to help solve some of the killings that are going on locally. And they're speculating about the traces of mummy mold they found on the bodies. They do some of this, CSI stuff to figure out what's going on with these victims. Now, meanwhile, this Banning descendant and his girlfriend, Isabel, who's played by Elise Knox, they're planning to get married. And the mysterious Bay, who's kind of spying on them, well, he falls in love with her. And he gives these instructions to Carice to go out and capture her. Now, it's interesting here because the mummy almost seems to be like, wait, what? And he's kind of reluctant to do this instruction, because he's all good with going off to kill people, but kidnap a girl? What? But Bay gives him the order, and off he goes. And it's interesting because it's like there's maybe this scrap of humanity to the poor mummy that maybe he's wondering what this zany Bay guy's up to. But he goes off, captures Elise, brings her back, and she's tied up at the funeral home. And it's here that Bay gives his big reveal of his plans to become a high priest in Egypt and how she's going to be his bride and bring him children and stuff. Well, she's not having any of that. So now that the girlfriend's been captured, things get serious. Banning drums up all the locals and they go off and they get word from one of the old characters that, hey, he thinks that the Bay character's over at the funeral home. So they all light up their torches and they head off to, find out what's going on, rescue the girl, and stop the mummy. And I'll stop the review here because you got to see the ending for yourself. I'm not going to ruin it for you. It's a surprisingly short film, maybe a little more than an hour. And that's including the recap of the previous film. So this one actually goes pretty quick. But it was a fun mummy movie, and I think Lon Chaney Jr. really nails the mummy character. He looks great, he's super creepy, and, nothing against Boris Karloff as the first mummy, that was excellent as well. But I really like the spin that Lon Chaney Jr. puts on the mummy here. And again, this Turhan Bey actor was fantastic as the one who's driving poor Carice behind the scenes. This Turhan Bey, he's this cool, calculating actor, and he's great to watch. And from what I read, he did a bunch of films in the 40s and then sort of vanished from Hollywood for a while. So I'm going to be watching to see if he shows up in any more of these older films. I like the idea of the story jumping ahead 30 years. I think that's kind of an interesting narrative gimmick to use. But, to be honest, the film, it still looks like the 1940s. It's black and white. Everything looks 40s. But, whatever. We don't have to read into it too much. It's fun to see those original characters from the previous film come back, albeit briefly, in the old man makeup. So it's fun to see the Banning character and his little buddy. And, that's about all I can say for this one. This is the third of the 6 films, and it was a lot of fun, and it's worth checking out.
I am going to take on to myself a wife, Carice. A wife. Do you understand that?